Tell me that. What is it you want? What do you want out of this year? Especially if you're kind of hot and bothered about situations like last night. I totally get it.
I'm going to borrow from Mike Singletary and just simply say, I want winners.
All right.
I want people who want to win. I don't care if we have to play with 4 guys and go up and down the court and get penalized on every play. Actually, that is a penalty in the NBA.
Have you memorized this thing?
I've watched it so many times, and all we ever talk about is I want winners, but if you watch the totality of that, it is near perfect. The passion with which Mike Singletary delivers the I want winners speech.
Good press conference.
Great orator.
It's a top 5 press
Better
conference.
speaker than he was a head coach.
Granted.
So the answer to your question is I want winners. And that means, and I'm a Kerr stan. I believe in Steve Kerr, and not just because he joins us at 5, a guy who's won 4 titles, a guy who's won 9 of the last 28 NBA championships. I'm going to borrow from you and say, I believe that he knows more than I do, Mark.
You do?
And you believe that about all the GMs and all the coaches, and that's great.
All of them.
Yes, and
all of them.
I do too, but I tend to be more. I'm more critical of every other coach and or GM. Steve is at the top of my list in terms of untouchability. So that's part of it. The other part, he's got to figure this thing out, and I hope that he has and I'm sure he has the courage. I guess courage is not the right word, but I hope he has the ability to be able to make these hard choices and play Kuminga and Moody when they're playing great, play them earlier, and be able to take these vets out.
Well, and by the way, acknowledge this, because I know this was one of those days, like if I could define it, right? The Warriors won, but you went to bed upset with Steve Kerr. Did I accurately describe the majority of the Warrior fans listening to us right now? You won the game, and you went to bed upset with Steve Kerr.
Which is crazy, but I think you're spot on.
Okay, so can we acknowledge that he's in a tough spot? If you're frustrated with Steve Kerr, are you willing today to acknowledge that he's in a tough spot?
I'm going to need you to elaborate on why he's in a tough spot.
He's in a tough spot because you would like him to potentially, at least potentially, take minutes away from people who have recently publicly stated that they should be above the idea of minutes being taken away from them. That's number one.
Klay Thompson is the one to whom you're referring?
Right. Number 2, you want him to know who's got it that night before the game even starts. Okay? I had questions, too, about why Kuminga's not in there, especially on a night when you're going against a young athletic team and he's your youngest, most athletic guy. That's a fair question. And we will get to that with Steve. But let's not act like Kuminga's a star. Let's not act like he's some dominating young player that Steve just doesn't like. So even Moses Moody. Moody goes in the other night, and he starts firing threes, and they're going in. And then Steve takes him out. And then Steve comes on our show the next day and goes, I totally messed that up. Okay. He's got to know, is Klay going to hit that night or not? And what I think most of us would like him to do, this is the only thing that's fair, because he's not he's not an intuitive. He's not a psychic.
Right.
So
a mentalist.
Right? So this person's supposed to know who's going to be good before the game. The only thing you can really ask for him to do is, when it's not working, go away from it. And when it is working, stick with it. And when he didn't do that with Moody last week, he did do that with Kuminga last night. So I would argue, if you want to argue he took too long to try Kuminga, fine. But I would argue, like you called it growth. We were talking about someone else. We were talking about Kuminga. But isn't that growth from last week to this week? Young player goes out, shows he's hot. Steve didn't take him out. He left him in there.
Yeah.
And they won the game because of it.
Largely, yeah.
He's in a tough spot.
I guess. I mean, I don't think he's in that tough a spot, but with the way you lay it out, I can appreciate it. And this is why he makes the big money. And if he signs a contract extension and sticks around, he'll make the biggest money, most likely. And this is where you got to have hard conversations. I do think last night was made easier by the fact that Chris Paul was returning from an absence and he wasn't quite right or ready to go out there and be a part of the closing lineup. That said, going forward, I wonder how much Steve is going to be willing to jigger and tweak that closing lineup idea that he threw out in the pregame, because Steph and Draymond, yes, those two have been the best Warriors this year. Beyond that, it has been a potpourri. It's been a bit of a crapshoot night to night. And last night, Chris Paul was not dominant. He was not necessarily needed late in that game. Wiggins, Klay, and Kuminga, it was a pretty easy choice last night.
Sure. Oh, gosh, you're not going to take energy like that out of the game.
Right.
Especially with the way it was going. You got to reward the guys. And again, you learn your lesson from last week.
And maybe that's a question for Steve in terms of the first half rotation. You went with just the 9 guys. Are you looking for 9 as the number? Why was Kuminga not, a part of a 10-man rotation?
I'd love to know how a pregame script comes together.
What's the plan? Yeah.
What goes into it? It was funny. I sat there last night. This crossed my mind, especially because it's such a trigger for so many Bay Area sports fans right now. Mm-hmm. You hear people go, Steve, why don't you play Kuminga? Because young, athletic Portland, young, athletic Kuminga, that's the spot for Kuminga. You should, do different lineups every night based on the matchup. Oh, you mean like Gabe Kapler?
Now you got to do your Kapler.
Obviously, Florida is nice this time of year.
We feel like Jock had the best chance in that at-bat.
This is what it felt like to me. Now, yes, it's different on 1,000 different fronts, but it felt to me like you guys were asking for analytics to take over the Warrior lineup. We spent all year, have a starting rotation, let them go 5 to 7 innings. Just have a left fielder, and that's your left fielder. Well, couldn't Steve, and didn't he last week try to say, have a starting lineup? And that's my starting lineup. Do you want me to go night to night?
Night.
And play matchups? Are we bringing in lefties when we play Portland and righties when we play Dallas? Do you want that? Is that even fair to ask for?
Well, if we want that, and I think some of us do, 888-957-9570, get there early, get there often, the phones are already jamming up.
Here we go.
What do they want? And by they, I mean the players. Do you know what the last time Klay Thompson came off the bench in a regular season? That date, March 11th, 2012.
Jeez.
The Giants had only one World Series.
Oh, my God.
You were probably 4 jobs removed. I'd only been fired once in this market. March 11th, 2012. Every NBA regular season game subsequent to that date, Klay Thompson's been in the starting lineup. So you're going to go to Klay and say, yeah, you know what, Klay, young athletic Portland, young athletic Golden State, you can go ahead and sit next to CP3 down there in the old retirement home. It's not happening.
Did Steve join us on Wednesday last week? All right, this is 8 days ago. So everybody, let's set the table, okay?
Set that thing.
And then we're going to the phones. 888-957-9570. We're going to do it all afternoon, and then Steve will join us at 5:00. Okay, on Willard and Dibs. Glad you're with us. But let's check it out. So the conversation started with regard to Steve being able to use the bench as a weapon. Maybe that's too strong of a word. A motivator, a reverse motivator if guys are not playing well or making poor decisions, turning the ball over, fouling. Remember the turnovers and fouls. Okay, here's what he said.
All we can do is beat the drum, and I at some point you can also use the bench as an example. I mean, a lot of coaches at every level, they say the bench is the most powerful force and tool that you have as a coach. But to be perfectly honest, if Steph reaches 3 times, am I going to take Steph out? Like, we kind of need Steph. So what we really need is our main players, our key guys, to set a tone for the group. It's easy for me to take a young guy out because he's fouling, but we need our starters, our best players, to set a great tone. We need Wiggs to stay down on a pump fake. We need Steph to not reach, and we need Klay to not reach. Those are the key guys for us. The stars are always the key guys in the NBA. They drive winning and losing. And so right now, we need our best players to set that tone in terms of not fouling, and it has to happen. If not, then we're in some trouble.
Okay, now that was when we held his feet to the fire.
Yeah, we did.
We're like, oh, Steve, the bench as a motivator. So let's talk about lineup changes. Like, is that what you're saying? If they keep fouling, if they keep turning the ball over, are they headed to the bench?
We won a championship a year and a half ago. The guys who are going to drive us winning a title or not, we know who they are, right? They're Steph, Draymond, Wiggs, Loon, Klay. Like those guys, they were the ones. Gary, huge part of that championship a year and a half ago. So we know those are the guys that have to perform at a high level if we're going to compete for a title. So you'll like this story. I learned this when I was a player. I was having a really bad series in the finals in '96 against Seattle. I had like 3 straight bad shooting nights, and I was distraught. My wife goes to a team dinner, or a dinner with a lot of the family members, and she runs into Jerry Reinsdorf, the owner, and he says, "How's Steve doing?" And she said, "Oh, he's crushed. He just feels like he's hurting the team." And Jerry goes, "Well, to be honest, it doesn't really matter what Steve does. It matters what Michael and Scotty do. They're the ones who determine whether we win or lose." So my wife tells me this, and there's part of me that's like, "Oh yes, I'm off the hook," and then there's the other part of me that's like, "Oh, I don't even matter. What the hell?"
Yeah.
All right, so then we jumped in and said, does that mean it's off the table? With those names you just mentioned, Is it off the table, the idea of lowering minutes there and giving them to others?
The guys who are going to determine our season are our main guys, our key guys, right? Are the guys who make all the money. They're the ones who determine winning and losing. I think our young guys are all developing, and they're developing at different stages. You try to help the development process. You fit them in here and there. But this season is about winning a championship. That means for me, I am going to lean in to our starters. I'm going to lean into our key guys, and I'm going to give them all the space they need to find their rhythm, to establish, who they are. And once that happens, it'll make the roles much easier to play for the young guys. If you want to bail out on the old guys and plug the young guys in, then you're talking about an entirely different goal. And that's now you're talking about the future. You're not talking about winning a championship, because those guys aren't ready to do that.
All right. That last sentence for me is where we are. That's what I think everybody listening, everybody who watches Warrior games, that's sort of what you need to answer. He goes, if you want to change that, then you're abandoning the idea of winning a title. You're and I totally get it. If I bet plenty of people listening were like me.
Well, plenty of people listening are going to say, let's just see if that is better than what we have. And maybe it's not totally abandoning. And nobody wants to, quote, bail out on the veterans who aren't playing well, but maybe you play them a little bit less. And Klay played 27 minutes last night. And you know what? That might be his new sweet spot in terms of what he can do and still be productive, which means more minutes for Podziemski, more minutes for Kuminga, more minutes for others. If you limit Chris Paul, and he's going to be limited, if you limit Andrew Wiggins a little bit when he's not playing great, Kevon Looney already, who's not having a terrific year, he's been fine, but he hasn't been as good as he has been. If you limit his minutes, there's room for other people to come in and play.